Hello. Say hi, Frank.
Hello, everybody.
Frank and I are here together. Um, he is in where are you?
South Carolina
South Carolina
at
etiquette.
a beach on vacation, and
Oh,
my husband's
yay.
at a convention.
Thank you. And I'm in Bakersfield, California. And today in Bakersfield, it is only 109 degrees today. How hot is it there, Frank?
Probably 95,
Yeah. But we
not as
have
bad
low
as here.
humidity. It's only 14% humidity. But as I always tell people, when it's 109 degrees, that's like sticking your head in the oven. And
Yes.
it doesn't matter what the humidity is, it's still pretty warm. So let's see who's here. My name's Suzanne Bryan, and my guest here is Frank Jernigan of Franco.com. This is a weekly live stream that I do, and we're currently doing the beginning stages of a knit along between Frank and I. And so you're not too late to join in. In fact, it's never too late to join in. This is about an hour long. If you're catching it live, welcome to the group. If this is your first time with the live stream, say so over in the chat. And I'm thanking you for coming and joining us. I think you'll have a good time. If you're watching this after the live stream's over, it is on YouTube. And thanks for watching the replay. And feel free to put your comments in even after the replay because I always look at them. So let's see who's here today. Rona Shane from Southern California. Summerhill Spinner from Western PA. That's a new name. Summerhill, are you new? Rosemary Evely from Durbanville near Cape Town, South Africa. Rosemary, welcome. Marie Tobita, New York City. Francoise from Lyon, France. Elizabeth Nielsen from Sweden. Trevster from Valencia, Spain. Kat B from Northern California. Jackie Rickles from my hometown of Bakersfield. Susan Day from the Pacific Northwest. Zip Cat from Pennsylvania. Kelly My Cat from New Hampshire. Lizanne from Benicia, California. Sidra Goldsmith from Vancouver, Washington. Beauty Kip Wyandotte from the Netherlands. Sue McVicker from Pennsylvania. Bradley Trahan from Rainy, Georgia. Arlette Garcia from Canada. Debbie Newland from Bakersfield. Hi, Debbie. Ruth Stubens from Vancouver, British Columbia. Arthur Lau from New Jersey. Belinda Drabble from damp and cold England. Jeanette Boland from North Carolina. Carol Brasino from New York. Maureen Rush from Bakersfield. She lives literally down the street from me. Hi, Maureen. Michelle Price from Virginia. Emily Beaton from Central PA. Hello, Emily. Diane Joel from Martinez. TR2 Tube. Teresa from Virginia. Delise Beeman from Washington. Hello, Delise. Susan Day, Seattle. Carolyn Finnerman from Central Oregon. And Irma for your from Ireland. So there's many more. Be sure to give us a thumbs up if you haven't already. That lets us know that you like what we're doing. So we're going to start out what we've talked about in the last two live streams and getting ready to start Franco.com set in. It's a simultaneous set-in sleeve, top-down garment. And he has his website, Franco.com. Let me see if I can plug that in here where you can see it. Right here. That's down at the bottom of the screen. It's Franco.com. And Frank Jernigan is the owner of that site, and that's him sitting here with me. The first week, we just discussed the possibility and what we could do. Last week, we discussed how to use his website. I will put a link to that up in this corner after this gets recorded on YouTube so that you can go back and watch that one if you want. Now, I want to let you know also these live streams are usually about an hour long, but Diana Danko graciously does the timestamp. She watches the live stream and she documents the topics that we talk about and makes timestamps. So when you go back and you watch the replay, you don't have to watch the whole thing to see a certain segment. For example, if you want to go back to last week's and see Frank show you how to get your pattern set up on his website, you can go right to that segment. You don't have to watch through the whole thing. So thank you, Diana, for doing that. I'm going to be knitting this too. In fact, I have 3 yarns that I'm going to choose from, and maybe you can help me choose. I'm going to make mine's going to be top down, and I'm not going to really have any particular stitch pattern. I want it to be very plain because I like the drape of this wool that I have. This is Wollmeise lace yarn, and it is a lace weight, but it's like a light fingering, and you get it's 300, each skein is 300 grams, and there's in this skein there's about 1,800 yards. So this is one color, so this is color A. You can help me vote. Okay, so it's just going to be a plain top down with a crew neck like this. This makes such a beautiful drapey fabric. This is color A. This is color B. It's kind of brown and has this purple, rusty brown, and the purple. I love it. Also a good color for me. Color B. This is color C. So let me know. Help me pick which one I'm going to do. Let's see what people are saying. Color A. Belinda says color A. Yeah, color A is pretty cool. This is color A. Color B. Color B, it's hard to see on the screen, but it's this gorgeous purple blending into the brown. It's really, really pretty.
So rich. Such rich colors.
Isn't it rich? Isn't it gorgeous? So I'm getting some color A's, color B, some color C's, B or C, B or C. Oh, color B. Oh, I'm going to start. I'm going to wind the yarn today after the live stream. So next week, we'll actually talk about starting the garment. So people have had some questions. The questions are, can you do a cardigan? Yes, you can, but you're going to have to think about it. And I'm going to get a piece of paper out here. Let me get a piece of paper. And I'm going to go to my hands and let me show you what you have to think about if you're going to do a cardigan, okay? So if you're going to do a cardigan, here is your sample sweater. It's got the shoulders that you do first, and then the neck, and then you start knitting in the round, okay? You would have to, here, if you want to put an opening for the cardigan for the front, you have to determine how wide do you want your cardigan front to be. Do you want it to be the bands? Do you want it 2 inches, 1 inch, you know? So let's say you want it 1 inch wide. So that means you're going to have to put in a 1 inch wide front opening. That means that you're going to have 1 inch fewer stitches here. And when you knit according to Frank's directions, you would knit around to here and then turn and go back this way. And you'd go back and forth like this for the whole sweater. That's all you have to do. Then you would pick up stitches along this edge and create either your button band or your buttonhole band, and vice versa over here. Now, what if you wanted to put a zipper in the front? Okay, let's say you want to put a zipper in the front instead of a button band. Same thing, you're going to have, he starts out with the saddles on the shoulders. That's part of the construction for doing the simultaneously set-in sleeves. If you want to put a zipper in the front, you would do the same thing, but I think that you would need to add a selvage stitch on each side. So you would actually have to add 2 stitches here, a selvage stitch for here and a selvage stitch for here, because you know when you have fabric, when you have the edge of a fabric, for example here, if you came over here and just ended, you have this is your selvage stitch. But if you want to put a zipper in, you might want that selvage stitch to be turned underneath so that you get this really nice finished edge along the edge of the zipper. And if you want to just put in a zipper along here, you can either do it by hand, or in this case, this would be very easy to put in by a sewing machine, because you would simply sew in between the legs of the stitches and it would be invisible. But what if you want to have a zipper with an edging on either side, kind of like your button band? Then you would go back to this scenario. So let's say we wanted to have ribbing on either side of the zipper, right? You would go back to this scenario, but you would only, and you would still remove the 1 inch of stitches, but when you pick up your button bands, you would only knit them this wide so that they meet in the center rather than overlapping. And then you could add your zipper. So those are the options. Now, we can take this even further. You could say, okay, what if I want to do a Henley? Well, you would do the divide down the front just down to the bottom of the Henley, and then you would be knitting in the round again. Same thing with the zipper. If you want the zipper just to come down like for a Henley, then at the bottom of where the zipper is going to be, you would continue to knitting in the round. So this part up here would be knit flat, and this would be knit in the round. So I know,
Suzanne?
Yes?
It might be helpful to know that there is a Henley pattern on the website, and I'm not sure how wide the band is, but I think it's 1.5 inches, 2 inches. I think it's wide. Somebody wanted to do a cardigan like you first described, they could start with the Henley pattern and just not close it at the bottom.
Exactly.
And just continue it down. That's the easiest way to do a cardigan, using my pattern, because the pattern directs you in everything to do, including the back and forth knitting.
Excellent.
To get you started.
So this is a possibility. And even with putting the zipper in, so with a Henley, normally with a Henley, your button band completely overlaps the, your buttonhole band completely overlaps the button band. But if you wanted to put a zipper in, you would just not knit them as wide and leave them so they match in the center to put your button in. Okay?
If you'd like to show this, I don't know if they can see it. That is the Henley pattern on the website.
Yes, excellent. Yes, and you could make that as deep as you want. See, he just has it 3 buttons deep. Let's say you want to make it a lot deeper. You would just continue in the same fashion, and you would just do it down longer. Excellent. Yes. Now, some other people were asking about, could they do this in stranded knitting, a Fair Isle design? So let's take a bigger look. Let me get more paper. The sweater itself, absolutely, you could do Fair Isle. Okay, no, absolutely no problem doing that. The top problem is the construction at the top. So when you first start, you're doing these saddles first. So when you do the saddles, whether you want to do them in Fair Isle or not, the gauge that you put in for your Fair Isle knitting, these saddles will need to be knit in that same gauge, or they will either be too long or too short. Oftentimes when you do strand, regular knitting stitches are rectangular stitches, right? Like knitter's graph paper is rectangular. But oftentimes when you do stranded knitting, because of the stranding, it causes the stitch gauge to be tighter. So your squares, they're more like squares. Stranded knitting is more like squares. So in the same distance where you've gotten 3 stitches here without the stranding, you might actually be getting 4 stitches. And that's something that you would have to take into account, because you're going to be knitting these in this direction, right, Frank? Are they knit?
Yes, you're knitting those in that direction, and that's actually pretty wide across the top. So if you have trouble knitting Fair Isle or stranded knitting back and forth, that might cause you difficulty above the neckline.
Yes,
but
exactly.
That was actually
So the sweater, when you're knitting this,
I was doing it for Fair Isle and for, yes.
So you might have to, so what I would recommend doing is for this, and it might be a little bit tricky, is just you doing this in stockinette, doing your gauge swatch for the sweater in plain stockinette, do stockinette, figure out your stitch and row gauge for the stockinette, do another gauge swatch in your stranded knitting pattern, and figure out the stitch and row gauge for that and what the difference is. Write the pattern for this, put this in for the direction so that you're getting stockinette. Allow yourself extra yarn when you're ordering your yarn. And then let's say you're getting 5 stitches to the inch here, but you're getting 6 stitches to the inch here, you would just compensate. Every 5 stitches you would add in a 6th stitch. I would still do the top exactly the same. It would be in stockinette, and when you get to the part where the sweater's joined in the round, which is going to be down in this area here, the first portion of it is knit flat, and then you join in the round. This is where you would start your Fair Isle, or your stranded knitting. So the very top of your sweater, the shoulders, and the very top of the sleeves would not be in stranded knitting, but it would look very, very attractive. Frank, you don't happen to have any of your sweaters there with you, do you?
I don't, but okay. I have pictures, and I can share a picture.
Yeah, let's look at one where you have a design that starts after the shoulders.
It's a saddle shoulder design.
Yes.
But excellent. It does start the pattern after the neck closes, as you see.
Right. And it does
not. So above the pattern,
you can see here where he's got the gold and then the black. You don't have to have the gold up there. You could have the whole top of that be the dark color. You don't have to have it be two-toned. He chose that for his pattern design. So let's say you want, so your whole top of your garment would be one color if you choose, and then your stranded work would start below that. This is an excellent example. So that kind of answers that question. Okay, let me see. There were some other questions that people asked on Ravelry. Let me go to that. Okay, so can you guys see this? Frank, can you see this? No.
No, I'm not on YouTube. Shall I?
Let me share it. Okay, can you see it now, Frank?
Yes, I can.
You can?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so questions for this week? So the first one is from Nitty Girl, and that's Diana, and she's the one that does the timestamps. And she initially, this is her drawing for her initial thought. She was going to do the corrugated ribbing down here on the button tab, around the neck, and the tops of the sleeves. And then she started thinking that she might like to, do corrugated ribbing for the whole portion right here. Now, the problem with that is that you're going to be knitting in the round, which is fine. If you, it would, unless you change right here, it's going to put corrugated ribbing across your shoulder. I think she intends to have it just here, and you could do that. You could do that. What would happen until this spot right here, it would work perfect because you would have two colors over to here. You would drop one color, work all the way around to the other side. You'd have to have two colors here, come back, drop the second color. So you'd have to have a second ball of yarn here and a second ball of yarn here. Drop the second color, work all the way over to here, pick up your second color, work here and back, drop the second color. It is doable. If you want to carry it below the button band for the Henley though, then you're going to have to start thinking about doing intarsia in the round, which is also possible. So Diana, think about that. Think about what you want to do. So it sounds like it might be a possibility, okay? Again, you'd have to be very mindful of your stitch gauge in the corrugated ribbing versus the stitch gauge on the back, which would be in stockinette. And you may have to cast on, add some extra stitches in here, do some stitch equivalency compensation, which we've talked about a lot. And then when you stop it, you would have to get rid of those extra stitches and go back to your flat stockinette. This is from Summerhill Spinner. And she's on here today. She was concerned about the shape of, this is for her ITAG SIS. This looks good, but what I would do is I would take, can you see my marker here? I would take your top and I would make more of a curve like this. So I would curve up and out. I'd draw it right onto the graph paper. So you're making more of a bell curve. And then that will work fine for you. Even if you knitted it exactly like this, it would be okay. But I think that if you make it more of a bell curve, it'll fit your shoulder cap better. Okay? This is Channy. She says, I'm thinking of a garter stitch or seed stitch all over sweater. How can I seam the rows to rows neatly? I have a video on seaming seed stitch, and I think I have a video on seaming garter stitch if you want to take a look at those. They can be done neatly, but sometimes it's not going to look like what a stockinette seam looks like. It looks completely differently. And there might be, you might think about making the seam have, let me go back to my hands. I'm going to stop sharing that for a second. Oh, I've got my hands right here. Let's share this. Second camera. We're not seeing my second camera. I'm going to close that because I can't see it's in the way. Okay, so here we have my hands here, okay, again. And so if you're seaming garter stitch, so you've got your pieces of garter stitch, okay? Two pieces of garter stitch. Garter stitch. You've got your garter rows, right? And you could seam them rows to rows. That would look fine. You could do that, yes. But sometimes it looks pretty cool to add a little bit of extra element in. For example, you might want to put in seed stitch for maybe 3 or 4 stitches on either side of your seam. This adds a little interest. And then you would seam the seed stitch. Now, seed stitch and garter stitch get a very similar row gauge. So you would be okay with your row gauge. But I think this might look really interesting on the side of your garment, other than just seaming the garter stitch to garter stitch. It's something to think about. Okay, let's go back to these questions. And the next one is from Demetria. I always like hearing from Demetria. So she wants to put this around the neck. Kind of like a shawl collar cardigan, only this is going to go around the neck, and she's wondering how she's going to join it in the back. This is something that you would have to swatch. There's several places here I could see that I would join it. For example, right here would easily join to here. So you could graft it together right there. Or you could graft it in the middle of a leaf, so it makes kind of one leaf in the center of the back. I'd have to swatch it, play around with it, and see. So Diane Joel says the image was bigger when you were talking about using your second camera. I'm sorry. Couldn't you use the next size up in needles for the stranded knitting? Absolutely, you could do that too. But that is if you like the fabric, so you'd have to swatch with a larger needle to make sure you like that fabric. I wouldn't just introduce a larger needle without swatching first, but great suggestion. This is Wire Knitter. I am stuck at the cast on for my ITAG SIS while I wait for further clarification on how to incorporate the pockets. Do I knit the entire pocket first and then incorporate it into the fabric of the sweater? Or do I knit the lower portion of the pocket? Each pocket, it depends on which pocket you're creating, because I can't tell from what you're talking about. It depends on which style of pocket you want to use. Some of them can be put on like afterthought pockets. Others need to be, different parts of the pocket need to be worked at different times in the construction. If you would give me more information about the style of the pocket that you want to add, I can give you a more direct answer. Okay, sorry about that. This is from Arrow to Go. Hello, I was watching the recorded live stream from last week and heard Suzanne said that she had worked the back of her sweater up to the armhole shaping, then stopped and was working the front up to the armhole, so she could work the shaping for both at the same time. I was wondering why you would do this, and also how do you work 2 separate pieces at the same time? I would do this so that I know that my shaping is exactly the same, and I keep both pieces on their separate needle. So each one has, in fact, I can show them to you right now in a second. As soon as we finish this, I would work them individually, but at the same time. Okay? Not like socks 2 at a time, not on the same needle. This is Hart 8400. I am about to bind off a sleeve that has approximately 120 stitches or so. This sleeve has several different patterns, 2 cables that are identical and 1 larger cable in the center with a moss-like stitch on the edges. Do I bind off in pattern? I was thinking about knitting 1 row of stockinette before binding off so it would be a bit easier to attach to the body. How should I handle this? Thanks so much. Very good question. If this is the top of the sleeve or something that's going to be going into being sewn into something else like the top of the sleeve, yes, I like to have the bind off in stockinette. The last row before the bind off is where I would make sure I'm working in pattern. And also that is where I would do any cable flare compensation. So your cables, you may want to reduce the stitches at the tops of the cables so that they don't flare out on you. I have several videos on that. And if you're in my Facebook group, you could show a picture of your sleeve cap and we could talk about it. I can give you direct guidance there. But yes, I like to be able to stitch from a stockinette bind off. Otherwise, you're seaming. When you go to seam the stitches, it gets very awkward. So seaming from the stockinette bind off is very good. Summerhill Spinner said, question continued. I can see that I could draw a curve to make a better bell curve, but I wondered if there was a part of the measurement that formed the correct shape rather than fudging it. For me, there is not the way that we measured it. No, you still have to fudge it. It's not really fudging it. It's just bending the line. It's taking the same line and just bending it, if you can picture that. Okay, so let's go back. That's all of those questions. Yay, I got that part done. We can take this away and I can put me back on here. So let's talk about getting on Frank's site. Have you all been able to get on there, that are the people that want to participate in this knit along? Have you been able to get on there and put your measurements in? Have you had any problems getting your measurements put in? So if you have a question about that, now's the time to answer it or ask it, and we'll answer it. And I'm going to go through and look for any other questions while you're doing that. There's always a little delay between when I talk and when you actually hear me, so I'll give you time to post your questions. So Irma's here for the first time from Holland. Hello, Irma. Nice to join us. Thank you. Oh, Suzanne Berry's on here. Hello, Suzanne. There are not very many Suzannes, you know. Summerhill Spinner says she's incognito friend of Diana Danko. I love Diana. Thank you. And Margaret's here from Chile. Kalpana's here again from India. She's a regular. Yay. I'm looking for questions, but I get sidetracked reading people's comments. Okay, let's see. Kayan's on here, but she's Arthur Lau right now. So if you see Arthur Lau, that's really Kayan. Okay, Francoise. Oh, she asked the question, is it possible to do the whole sweater in Fair Isle pattern? What do you think, Frank?
If you're comfortable knitting Fair Isle flat for just a little bit at the top of the sweater, it will work fine.
Okay. Michelle Price, question. If you're knitting the saddle shoulders and then adding the circular yoke, does that affect the way the yoke will hang from the shoulders down?
Adding the circular yoke?
It's not really a circular yoke. What it is simultaneously knitting the front, the back, and both sleeve caps at the same time. So it's not really a yoke. Right.
The saddle shoulder pattern tells you exactly how to do that.
Right.
Just choose the saddle shoulder pattern instead of the crew neck.
And it doesn't affect, in fact, it makes it hang really nicely, because then if you just have a yoke without the saddle shoulders, then everything's hanging from here like this, like a pie shawl, okay? Hanging out this way, because you knit the saddles first and then you pick up stitches along here and go down, then it's hanging straight down from the tops of your shoulders. So it's less likely to slide off like this. A yoke, a true yoke or raglan sweater, tends to pull the neck from side to side. But if you have saddles, then it changes where the weight is distributed. So the weight of the sweater is distributed straight across here, the engineering of it. So it hangs down this way. So it's going to hang this way and down from the back and less likely to pull your neck out like this. Okay? Okay, so Belinda, sample sweater at the moment. Belinda says she's knitting the sample sweater at the moment, and she loves the result. And Diane Joel says, yes, she has her pattern. And Francois says, thank you, Frank. So they don't seem to have any questions about having difficulty getting in and getting their pattern lined up.
Oh, great. I can tell a lot of new members went to the website this week, and more people than usual, many more people than usual purchased a pattern in the last week. So I'm assuming a lot of people are not having trouble, but every now and then somebody says, I can't figure out what to put in this field or that field or something else.
So here's another question from Barbara Kalsa. Question, for a shallow boat neck, do I just increase the measurement of my neck to the desired circumference?
I don't know. What would you say, Suzanne?
Well, it's not going to change the width of the shoulders, is it? It
No,
doesn't
it
change
won't.
that.
No.
So,
and the neck will still come to here, but I don't know if you make it real wide, would it droop more than you want? I don't know. Isn't a boat neck usually just straight, like
right.
a cut across the top?
You know what, Barbara, come back and ask that next week, because this week I'm going to be entering all my measurements and I will have a pattern in front of me and I can see exactly what the row by row directions are and I can answer you better. Okay? And I'll keep your question in mind. So come back next week and I will talk about boat neck. In fact, maybe I'd like to do a boat neck on mine too. So that's good. That's good. I'll do that on mine and then you can do it on yours too. Okay?
I believe there will be a limit to how wide you can make your neck.
Right.
And the pattern will then say, I can't do that, because it will assume the neck's getting deeper. And once it gets too far down, it says, right now, it just says you can't make it deeper than a certain amount.
Right. So, but what you could do, so you have the shoulders here, the saddle shoulders. And then in your pattern, I'm assuming that it has you work here, back, work here, and add some stitches and go like that until you come around and you join in the front, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what you would do...
I'm sorry, I was thrown by the saddle shoulders, but they're like saddle shoulders, but they're knitted across. Yes.
Right. But then you pick up the stitches, and then you're going to be knitting back and forth, creating the front neck, right?
That's right. Yes.
Right, but you're knitting around.
Yes, and you could eliminate that. You could eliminate that shaping. That would be a really good choice in that case.
So you would just eliminate. You would cast on more stitches at the ends of your needles to eliminate the neck, keep the neck from coming down like this. Yes.
And you may have to change the number of stitches to cast on to create a wider neck than the pattern calls for. Yeah. You may have to do that, but it could also be done.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that. I think it's very doable. It's just it's a matter of understanding the mechanics of how it all fits together.
That's right.
So Sidra Goldsmith says, I'm swatching my pocket with a mosaic pattern. When I slip a stitch that is supposed to connect to the lining, would it connect on the return purl row without showing on the front? When you connect them, you can choose to show which stitch you want to show, whether you do an SSK or a knit two together or a purl two together or an SSP. Okay, if you understand what those stitches do. For example, when you do an SSP, the second stitch of the two will be the one that shows at the top on the right side of the fabric. If you do a purl two together, the first of the two will be the one that shows on the top of the right side of the fabric. When you do a knit two together, it's the same thing. The second stitch of the knit comes on top of the first, and that will be the one that shows on the right side of the fabric. Whereas if you do an SSK, it takes the first stitch of the SSK and puts it on top of the second stitch. So when you have two different fabrics together and you're going to combine them by an SSK or a knit two together, if this is the fabric you want on the top, then you would do an SSK or an SSP. If this is the fabric you want on the top, you would do a knit two together or a purl two together. So you can control which stitch shows on the right side of the work by the direction of the knit two together or the SSP. Okay, try it on a swatch. That's always the smartest thing to do. This is Kayan. Question from Kayan. Is it possible to use Frank's pattern and steek for a cardigan with a shawl collar? Yes, absolutely. Yep.
It's been done.
Yep.
I don't know about the shawl collar, but it has definitely been steeked from
Yes.
from the crew neck to a
Rona
cardigan.
Shane, I finished my Franco crew neck sweater. I would like a little more ease in the body. The sleeve width and length is perfect. If I go up a size on the body, I'm afraid the sleeves will be too big.
What you do is increase the size, increase the fit of that you choose, but first reduce the size of your arm. If your arm is 13 inches around and you want the sleeve to be 15, but you're going to use an ease that is 4 inches instead of 2, it is going to add the ease to the arm, but you would then say your arm is 11 and add the 4 inches and still get your 15-inch sleeve.
Right. Play around with it. Yeah.
And do all of that adjusting before you purchase the pattern, because you can change anything over and over and play with the schematic until you purchase it.
Now, Jolise, will you be covering bust shaping next week? I think next week I'm going to be starting to knit my sweater. Okay, so next week, most likely we're going to be talking about casting on and the saddles and doing the neck shaping and deciding whether you're going to have an opening in the front for either a Henley style or cardigan or whatever, or if you're steeking, where you're going to put your steek, and you would have to add extra stitches for the steek, right? So we'll talk about all that stuff. The very next week, I suspect we're going to talk about bust shaping, because that's where we'll be at that point. We'll talk about bust shaping. And then the following week, we can do waist shaping or belly shaping if you have a belly. And we'll go along like that. How's that sound for a time frame?
Sounds perfect. Perfect.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to show you my ITAG, and hopefully I'm going to be working them simultaneously for a little while. But here is my back, what I've got done so far.
Wow.
And here is the front, what I've got done so far. So it's coming along. I absolutely have the pattern completely memorized at this time, so it goes much faster for me. And once I get both of them the same length to where they're going to be for the underarm, then I'm going to work a row with underarm shaping on one piece, same row on the other piece. Then work back on one piece, work back on the other piece, and I'm going to do my armhole and neck shaping just like that so that they match perfectly. And because I'm just knitting from my schematic, I'm not knitting from row by row directions. I find it easier to do that. I'm just literally knitting from my drawing. Okay. Rona Shane, will that make the depth the same? Rona Shane. The neck depth, is that what you're talking? Rona's the one that wants to have a little bit more ease in the body of her sweater. It shouldn't change the neck depth. It's not going to change.
Changing the ease does not change the neck.
It only changes circumference. It does not change any length directions, only circumference. You'll have extra stitches.
And it's only It's only the circumference of the chest, the arms, and the wrist that are adjusted
Not
with
the
the
neck.
ease.
The neck,
All other
go by
measurements
your
stay the
neck
same.
measurements that you put in. And unless you change your neck measurements, that's not going to change. Any other questions? So please share this with your friends. It's okay if new people join in. We'd like to have more people if you have friends that would like to do this. This can be as simple or as complicated as you want. If you want to just knit a straightforward sweater without anything extra, just follow Frank's directions. But if you want to add, like next week, one more thing I wanted to talk about. See, I was going to wrap up and I have my swatches here. I wanted to talk a little bit about, let me go back to my hands. Okay, so here I have a pile of swatches I wanted to share with you. The first one, this is a swatch that I use in my Boot Camp 2 class, okay? And you cast on and you work in the round for 4 inches, and then you bind off half the stitches and work another 4 inches. And then you measure your stitch gauge. The row gauge isn't so important on this, but the stitch gauge is, because many of you may know that maybe your knit stitches and your purl stitches are not necessarily the same size, right? Have you ever seen gutters in your work when you look at the wrong side of the fabric and you see these lines going across there? That's when you have a discrepancy between your knits and your purls. And it could be that the purls are bigger than the knits, or it could be that the knits are bigger than the purls. So you need to just be aware of that, because when you change from knitting flat, which the top of this garment is knit flat, to knitting in the round, you may get a completely different gauge. What this tells you, the majority of this sweater is knit in the round, is that if you're going to do a gauge swatch for this sweater, you should do it in the round. I do my gauge swatches in the round when I'm going to be knitting in the round. But I have very even tension. You can see I don't have any gutters on here at all. But I still do my gauge swatches in the round. Here's a gauge swatch for in the round. So I want to show you 3 ways to do gauge swatches in the round, and pluses and minuses for each. This is my personal opinion from my personal experience. You can do whatever you want from your personal experience. When I'm going to do a gauge swatch for knitting in the round, I cast on in the round and I work the whole thing in the round. And then I block it. And then I measure my gauge. Some people will do the same thing, but they'll cast on their stitches. They knit, this is half the number of this. So this width here is the same as this. They cast on half the numbers of stitches I would have cast on for here. They knit across, and then they just strand the yarn across the back, knit, strand, knit, so forth and so on, till they've got this fabric here. You can see that all the stitches on the edges are wonky, so it gives you less stitches to measure width to width, and you have all these strands across the back. When you go to block this, it's very wonky. I like that word wonky, because the fabric can't lay flat because there's all this bulk here behind it. So you don't really get a good flat fabric. Now you could just cut straight up here and remove all of that, but I don't care to do that. This is my personal preference. Just like I said, I don't care to do that because I like to keep my gauge swatch just in case I might need to have that extra yarn for some reason or another, okay? So if I cut it, this yarn is no longer usable. Now there is a time when this type of thing is good to use, stranding it across the back. And that is if you're going to work something like this. This is some Fair Isle, and this is for a sweater that I did, that I was swatching for. And when you're swatching in this type, you break the yarn. You don't carry it across, you just break it at the end. There's no knots or anything in this, and you can see because this is Shetland wool, the stitches don't loosen up. And I did this probably, 8 or 10 years ago, and I show it all the time in my classes. You can see these stitches have not loosened up at all. There are no knots here, nothing holding it. You can see these are just loose strands across the back, and I just trimmed them off. I broke them and then knitted the next row, and then I just trimmed them off so they're nice and tidy, because this type of wool is so sticky to itself, it's Shetland wool, that you really can't rip this out anyway. Okay, so this is not a swatch where you're going to rip it out and reuse this yarn. That's when I do knit in the round, but in this flat method. I don't really do this. I don't care for it, but you might, and if it works for you, that's great. I like this one. And it really doesn't take me any longer to do this than it does to do this. It really doesn't. So that's about knitting in the round. Then I wanted to show you one other thing. Remember last week we were talking about stitch equivalency. Okay, this little swatch is 20 stitches wide. This is 20 stitches wide in stockinette. This is worsted weight yarn with a US 7 or 4.5 millimeter needle. This is also 20 stitches wide with the same needle, same knitter, same yarn. So you can see here that this is much wider than this. So this stitch pattern, these cables pulled the fabric in because it is 20 stitches, just like this is 20 stitches. So in Frank's sweater, let's say you want to put a cable down the front. You would need to know your gauge here. And if I put it on here, it's really easy to do this. This 20 stitches of this is equivalent to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 14 stitches of this. These 20 stitches are equal to 14 of this. So I'm getting a ratio of 10 to 7. For every 7 stitches here, it takes 10 stitches here to make the same width. So in that case, I could do the top of the sweater and get all my stitches on, but when I got to the part where the cable is, I would need to add in some stitches here, wouldn't I? For every 7, I would need to add in an additional 3 stitches. Then when I got down to the bottom of the sweater, and I'm going to do my ribbing or whatever at the bottom, then I would get rid of those 3 stitches for each 7. And I've actually done that in this little swatch. I cast on less stitches than I needed, and I added them right at the base of the cable. So you can see the bottom and top of the cast on, there are many fewer stitches in the cast on and bind off than there are here. Any questions about that? So you could do that with anything. Let's say you're doing lace. You want to put, in fact, I was thinking about that. Maybe in my really plain sweater, I might put a lace panel straight down the back. I would need to do my gauge swatch for my lace panel in the round. These are both flat. They should be in the round for this example. I would do my lace swatch in the round and compare my stitch gauge to my stockinette stitch gauge. Now lace, I might have fewer stitches to the inch, right? Because of the lace being more open. Maybe not. I won't know till I work my sample. But I would compensate at the top of the back of the sweater where I'm going to start the lace. I would either add or subtract stitches so that my lace panel fit in perfectly and didn't cause my sweater to contract or expand unexpectedly. Okay. Uh-oh, Belinda, what are you talking about? She said, I had never encountered such messages on YouTube and wasn't sure what action I take. I need to hide. Did somebody put some spam in here? If somebody puts spam in here, somebody needs to hide it and report it. Okay. What to the depth of the same? Thank you. Rona from Voorhees, New Jersey. Stephen, oh, hi, Rona. Nice to see you on here. Julie, question. If I have a large bust and plan on doing some shaping, which measurements do I use before shaping or actual measurement? What I do for a large bust, let me get rid of this here and go back to Frank and I. What I do for determining whether you need to add extra fabric for a large bust is put a point at the top of your shoulder that's in the middle, like in the middle between the front and the back, right here. Then you measure from that point to your waist on the back. Tie a string around your waist. Measure from this point to the waist down the back, and then measure from this point to the waist down the front, and see how much extra fabric does your bust need. Okay, if it needs 2 inches or less, I don't add anything, because knitting is so stretchy that 2 inches, your bust will just push out and 2 inches will be fine. But if you have more than 2 inches, then you need to add anything greater than 2 inches, and you can do that with short rows, and we'll talk about it, okay? Good question. Beauty Kip Wyandotte. Question, is it okay to swatch in the round with a steek and lay it flat to count the stitches? Absolutely. So if you wanted to, where's my little blue swatch? I think it actually is more accurate to knit a little swatch like this, and if you wanted to cut it, then cut it, open it up, and measure your gauge, because you'd have a bigger area to measure. The bigger the area, the more accurate your stitch count is, okay? Delise Beeman, thank you very much for catching the perv who was soiling our chat. Yes, thank you. Joanne Young, thank you for clarifying swatching in the round and color work. Lee Zan, Dolise and Susan, how do I answer? I don't know. That's what I said. Don't know about it. Dolise didn't even spot. Okay, that's all about some guy got on here. Lee Zan took care of it. Barbara, question, Frank, please include invitation details on how to join your Saturday Zoom meetings. Okay, Frank, let me type it out and put it up here, okay? And you'll have to read it to me. Hold on, I can adjust this.
I brought up YouTube so I can actually type it in.
Okay, but let me put it right here. Can you say it to me?
Sure, franco.com/weekly_Zoom_meeting.
Okay, excellent, thank you. There it is right there at the bottom of the screen, okay? So you guys can see that.
And that will start in a half hour.
2:30, yes. It's at 2:30, directly after this, and he would love to have you join him.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have a wonderful time just sharing our progress, and some people ask questions, but it's not really a knit along. It's just a time for Franco sweater knitters to get together and share.
And there's quite a few people here who join in that, so you won't be alone if you've never done it before. Go ahead, just jump on over there. I know Belinda's over there, and several other people from this group are in there every week, and they have a really, really good time. And if you don't know Belinda, you need to know Belinda.
Yes.
And it's a Zoom, so you can see everybody's faces and you can talk back and forth with each other, okay? Any other questions? We'll just about wrap it up. Otherwise, we'll see you here next week, same time, same place. Be sure to give us a thumbs up. Leave a comment in the comment section of the video after it's up on YouTube. Share it with your friends, and come back, and we'll see you again next week, okay? Happy knitting. Yay.